Now, senior national security reporter David Rode, MS Inez de la Cuetara in Paris, senior fellow for the Council on Foreign Relations, Elisa Ewers, and New York Times chief White House correspondent, MS Now contributor Peter Baker. David, walk us through all these different updates from the president this morning on Iran.
So there's a lot here, and in general, this is good news. The ceasefire in Lebanon is good news, and if the strait is reopening, that's great news. We've actually put together a graphic because the president, to help viewers, had said so many things this morning. So I just want to read through each of these points on what he's saying. So first, at the top of your screen, Iran and Trump claim the Strait of Hormuz is open to traffic. The one cautionary note on that announcement is that the Iranian foreign minister said in line with the ceasefire in Lebanon. That is a signal that Iran will keep the Strait of Hormuz open as long as there is a ceasefire in Lebanon. This is one of their key conditions, so the president might have been exaggerating a bit here. He confirms the naval blockade will remain in effect for Iran. The U.S. will do that. That's a way to keep pressure on the Iranians. Claims the U.S. will get nuclear dust and that no money will be exchanged hands for it. That's in response to a news report from Axios, which said that the U.S. might be giving up some of these Iranian assets that are frozen abroad that Iran's been asking for years. President Obama gave them back some of that money. Trump is denying that, but I think the Iranians will demand that money. This is Iranian money that was frozen years ago, and they claim they want it back. And then lastly, says Israel will not bomb Lebanon anymore. The issue there, as we just saw, the statement from the Israeli defense minister saying things are not yet completed. He attacked NATO allies for not helping open the Strait of Hormuz. I think it would be good if he would allow them to help. The more Navy ships, NATO or U.S., that can accompany tankers, the more they will leave. They want to be secure when they leave the Strait of Hormuz. There's still reports of mines there. Iran, with the assistance of the U.S., has removed or will remove all mines. I hope that will happen. We have no confirmation from the Iranians on that side. And then lastly, claims Iran will never close the Strait of Hormuz again. As I said at the beginning, Iran has not said that. They have said as long as the ceasefire continues in Lebanon, the strait will remain open.
If these are all true, these are major deals, but we don't know for sure what the true status is and what the official line is at this point. None of it appears to be confirmed other than the strait being back open from Iran. Elisa, the strait was Iran's ace. Now the president is saying they will never close it again. He also says the naval blockade on Iranian ports is still in effect. Why would Tehran agree to any of this?
I don't think that they have, Anna. I think that this is the narrative game that both sides are playing in building leverage going into potentially another round of talks. We have the April 21st deadline that might get extended. There are rumors of talks again in Islamabad at some level that might be coming online here soon. So I think this is really all about building the leverage. The problem with Iran's ace in the hole on the Strait of Hormuz is that it can't be undone, right? The fact that it can hold the strait at risk without blocking a single vessel is not something that you can just erase. And so this is leverage they're going to continue to use in any negotiations moving forward.
And I'm just getting a readout from the president's new interview, it sounds like, with News Nation. He's making phone calls as he's tweeting all these things out. And here's what this reporter from News Nation just put out on X, David. Breaking. I just spoke with President Trump on the phone from Las Vegas, and I asked him about the stream of Truth Social posts. I got right to the point. I asked the president if Iran agreed to stop enriching uranium. This reporter from News Nation writes, yes, he told me. He says he followed up with, they agreed to stop enriching uranium. The president responding, they agreed to everything. Yes, are you surprised? I asked, are you surprised? He told me, I'm not surprised by anything. Then he said, I'll see you later. The call ended. Your thoughts?
No Iranian confirmation of that claim by the president. And we want to be cautious here. Look, it's great progress, Lebanon opening up the strait. But there's been no public statement that I have seen that Iran has agreed to stop enriching uranium.
And Peter, President Trump is sounding very happy in these posts this morning, according to this interview that was reported out from News Nation. Yesterday, we heard him make bold predictions regarding oil and the Strait of Hormuz. Let's listen.
I think we have a very successful negotiation going on right now. And I think it'll be, if it happens, it'll be announced fairly soon. and that'll give us free oil, free Hormuz Strait. Everything will be nice, and I think your oil price will go down to lower than what it was before.
Peter, are you hearing anything about Trump's claim there of free oil? Does the White House think this is going to immediately alleviate the pain at the pump?
Well, look, obviously it's had an impact very quickly on the markets, very quickly on the oil markets. The price is heading down, as you rightly showed. He is so eager to get this war behind him, to get the markets back on track as he sees it. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure on the part of his Republican allies to be able to define a way of getting out of this war. He wants to be able to do it while declaring victory. What he outlined today would certainly sound like a victory. I think, as David says, we have to wait and see, how it actually plays out. We have his claims. He often says things, and then things don't turn out to be quite the same as he described them, or things change. So we do need to be cautious at this point. But what he has described is something that has encouraged, obviously, a lot of people, including the investors, including the oil markets.
Inez, the alarm bells were sounding there in Europe yesterday as the International Energy Agency warned that Europe could run out of fuel in as soon as 6 weeks. How are leaders there reacting to this news?
Hey, Anna. Yeah, critical discussions being held here in Paris today to talk about reopening the Strait of Hormuz, chaired by the French President Emmanuel Macron and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who announced moments ago that together with Germany and Italy, they would be launching a multinational force to ensure freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. We heard from Macron moments ago talking about how he welcomes news that the Strait is reopening. He says this initiative will help ensure that the Strait stays open. So the Europeans there potentially trying to appease President Trump, who, of course, has repeatedly called on them to do more to secure the Strait. But President Trump, you guys mentioned it off the top, lashing out at NATO allies today. So I'll read you the Truth Social post. He says, now that the Strait of Hormuz situation is over, I received a call from NATO asking if we would need some help. I told them to stay away unless they just want to load up their ships with oil. They were useless when needed, a paper tiger. So we'll see what comes of that. We know European leaders today at that summit are also discussing the economic consequences of the war in Iran. They're worried about things like inflation, food shortages, and the possibility that they could be running out of jet fuel and that there could be flight cancellations. We heard from the head of the International Energy Agency just yesterday saying that Europe just has 6 weeks worth of fuel left because Europe imports about 75% of its jet fuel from the Middle East. So we'll see, now that the Strait is reopened, whether the situation gets resolved. I will say, though, it's likely that major shipping companies will want to wait a little bit and ensure that the ceasefire really holds up for a sustained period before they fully resume their activities. So it could still be a little while before things get back to normal.
David, turning to Lebanon and Israel, there's a very fragile ceasefire in place between these two countries. What's the latest on that front?
It is holding, and that's the most positive thing. But you've got the rhetoric from both Hezbollah and Israel saying they're ready to resume this if needed. But this is a huge step forward. More than 1,000 people have died there. Nearly 1 million are displaced. And the fact that Lebanese are heading back towards these villages in the South Lebanon is a positive sign. I think the broad outlines of a deal are here, in that you have a ceasefire in Lebanon, the Strait of Hormuz opens up, and then the U.S. has to work out some deal with the Iranians. The Iranians, according again to this Axios report, are still asking for some type of uranium to be kept. They want some very low-level enriched uranium to use for medical experiments. This is all complicated and a long debate, but under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, countries are supposed to be able to do that. Countries do that by importing uranium from other countries. That's one way this could go forward. And then there is this issue of this Iranian money. It is their money. It was frozen overseas when there were past difficulties. So the outlines of a deal are here, but we are not there. And I think some of the things the president said are...
What we're witnessing here is not just diplomacy in motion, but a masterclass in narrative shaping, where perception is moving almost faster than reality itself. The statements coming out of Donald Trump suggest sweeping breakthroughs, yet the underlying facts remain fragmented, conditional, and in many cases, unverified. That gap between declaration and confirmation is where the real story lives. At first glance, the developments sound overwhelmingly positive. A ceasefire in Lebanon, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and hints at nuclear concessions from Iran all point toward de-escalation. But diplomacy rarely operates in absolutes, and what's being presented as settled outcomes looks more like evolving leverage. This is where caution becomes essential. Iran's position, as suggested, appears conditional rather than permanent. Keeping the strait open only as long as a ceasefire holds is not a concession, it's a bargaining chip. Similarly, claims about halting uranium enrichment without direct confirmation raise questions about whether these are negotiated realities or strategic messaging ahead of further talks. What's particularly striking is the role of timing. With markets reacting instantly and oil prices already shifting, the political incentive to project confidence is enormous. Declaring progress can, in itself, create momentum. Meanwhile, tensions with allies add another layer of complexity. Criticism of NATO and mixed signals about cooperation suggest a balancing act between asserting dominance and needing collective security support. The irony is clear. Stabilizing a global choke point like the Strait likely requires exactly the kind of multinational coordination being publicly downplayed. Then there's the situation on the ground. A fragile ceasefire involving groups like Hezbollah and regional powers is not something that can be secured through statements alone. History shows that these pauses can unravel quickly, especially when underlying conflicts remain unresolved. Ultimately, this moment reflects a broader pattern in modern geopolitics, where announcements are as strategic as actions. Leaders are not just negotiating outcomes, they are negotiating narratives. And while optimism has its place, the distance between what is said and what is actually secured remains significant. The real test is not whether these claims sound convincing today, but whether they hold up under the pressure of time, verification, and competing interests.